"What does he mean? Can you tell me what to think?" cried Neville, almost gasping for breath. "I will tell you in a few hours," said Elizabeth. "I must go to him now. I fear he is very ill. This is madness. When your mother died, Mr. Neville, my father and I were traveling together in Russia or Poland. I remember dates. I am sure that it was so. This is too dreadful. Farewell. You sail tomorrow. You shall hear from me tonight." "Be sure that I do," said Neville, for there is a method in his speech, a dignity and a composure in his manner that enforces a sort of belief. "What can he mean?" "Do you imagine," cried Elizabeth, "that there is any truth in these unhappy ravings? That my father, who would not tread upon a worm, whose compassionate disposition and disinterestedness have been known to me since early childhood, the noblest and yet the gentlest of human beings, do you imagine that he is a murderer? Dear Mr. Neville, he never could have seen your mother." "Is it indeed so?" said Neville. "Yet he said one word, did you not remark? He called himself Rupert, but I will not distress you. You will write, or rather, as my time will be occupied in preparations for my voyage, and I scarcely know where the day will be spent, I will call here this evening at 9. If you cannot see me, send me a note to the gate, containing some information, either to expedite or delay my journey. Even if this strange scene be the work of insanity, how can I leave you in distress? And if it be true what he says, if he be the man I saw tear my mother from me, how altered, how turned to age and decrepitude. Yet, if he be that man, then I have a new and horrible course to take." "Is it so?" cried Elizabeth, with indignation. "And can a man so cloud his fair fame, so destroy his very existence, by the wild words of delirium, that my dear father should be accused of being the most odious criminal?" "Nay," replied Neville, "I make no accusation. Do not part from me in anger. You are right, I do not doubt, and I am unjust. I will call tonight." "Do so without fail. Do not lose your passage. I little knew that personal feeling would add to my eagerness to learn the truth. Do not stay for my sake. Come tonight and learn how false and wild my father's words were, and then hasten to depart to see Osborne, to learn all. Farewell till this evening." She hurried away to Falkner's room, while stunned, doubting, forced by Elizabeth to entertain doubts, and yet convinced in his heart. For the name of Rupert brought conviction home, Neville left the house. He had entered it fostering the sweetest dreams of happiness, and now he dared not look at the reverse. Elizabeth, filled with the most poignant inquietude with regard to his health, hastened to the sitting-room which Falkner usually occupied. She found him seated at the table, with a small box, a box she well remembered, open before him. He was looking over the papers it contained. His manner was perfectly composed. The natural hue had returned to his cheeks. His look was sedate. He was, indeed, very different from the man who, 13 years before, had landed in Cornwall. He was then in the prime of life, and if passion defaced his features, still youth and health and power animated his frame. Long years of grief and remorse, with sickness superadded, had made him old before his time. The hair had receded from the temples, and what remained was sprinkled with gray. His figure was bent and attenuated, his face careworn, yet, at this moment, he had regained a portion of his former self. There was an expression on his face of satisfaction, almost of triumph, and when he saw Elizabeth, the old, sweet smile she knew and loved so well lighted up his countenance. He held out his hand, she took it. There was no fever in the palm, his pulse was equable, and when he spoke his voice did not falter. He said, "This blow has fallen heavily on you, my dear girl, yet all will be well soon, I trust. Meanwhile it cannot be quite unexpected." Elizabeth looked her astonishment. He continued, "You have long known that a heavy crime weighs on my conscience. It renders me unfit to live, yet I have not been permitted to die. I sought death, but we are seldom allowed to direct our fate. I do not, however, complain. I am well content with the end which will speedily terminate all." "My dearest father," cried Elizabeth, "I cannot guess what you mean. I thought, but no, you are not ill, you are not." "Not mad, dearest. Was that your thought? It is a madness, at least, that has lasted long, since first you stayed my hand on your mother's grave. You are too good, too affectionate to regret having saved me, even when you hear who I am. You are too resigned to Providence not to acquiesce in the way chosen to bring all things to their destined end." Elizabeth put her arm round his neck and kissed him. "Thank you," said Falkner, "and God bless you for this kindness. I shall indeed be glad if you, from your heart, pardon and excuse me. Meanwhile, my love, there is something to be done. These papers contain an account of the miserable past. You must read them, and then let Mr. Neville have them without delay." "Nay," said Elizabeth, "spare me this one thing. Do not ask me to read the history of any one error of yours. In my eyes, you must ever be the first and best of human beings. If it has ever been otherwise, I will not hear of it. You shall never be accused of guilt before me, even by yourself." "Call it then my justification," said Falkner, "but do not refuse my request. It is necessary. If it be pain, pardon me for inflicting it, but bear it for my sake. I wrote this narrative when I believed myself about to die in Greece, for the chief purpose of disclosing the truth to you. I have told my story truly and simply. You can have it from no one else, for no human being breathes who knows the truth except myself. Yield, then, you have ever been yielding to me. Yield, I beseech you, to my solemn request. Do not shrink from hearing of my crimes. I hope soon to atone them. And then perform one other duty. Send these papers to your friend. You know where he is. He will call here this evening at 9. By that time you will have finished. I am going to town now, but shall return tonight. Mr. Neville will be come and gone before then, and you will know all. I do not doubt but that you will pity me. Such is your generosity, that perhaps you may love me still, but you will be shocked and wretched, and I the cause. Alas, how many weapons do our errors wield, and how surely does retribution aim at our defenseless side. To know that I am the cause of unhappiness to you, my sweet girl, inflicts a pang I cannot endure with any fortitude. But there is a remedy, and all will be well in the end." Elizabeth hung over him as he spoke, and he felt a tear warm on his cheek, fallen from her eye. He was subdued by this testimony of her sympathy. He strained her to his heart. But in a moment after, he reassumed his self-command, and kissing her, bade her farewell, and then left her to the task of sorrow he had assigned. She knew not what to think, what image to conjure up. His words were free from all incoherence. Before her also were the papers that would tell all. She turned from them with disgust. And then again she thought of Neville, his departure, his promised return, and what she could say to him. It was a hideous dream, but there was no awakening. She sat down, she took out the papers. The number of pages written in her father's hand seemed a reprieve. She should not hear all the dreadful truth in a few short, piercing words. There was preparation. For a moment she paused to gather her thoughts, to pray for fortitude, to hope that the worst was not there, but in its stead some venial error that looked like crime to his sensitive mind. And then she began to read. Chapter 26. Falkner's Narrative. To palliate crime, and by investigating motive, to render guilt less odious, such is not the feeling that rules my pen. To confer honor upon innocence, to vindicate virtue, and announce truth, though that offer my own name as a mark for deserved infamy, such are my motives. And if I reveal the secrets of my heart, and dwell on the circumstances that led to the fatal catastrophe I record, so that, though a criminal, I do not appear quite a monster, let the egotism be excused for her dear sake, within whose young and gentle heart I would fain that my memory should be enshrined without horror, though with blame. The truth, the pure and sacred truth, will alone find expression in these pages. I write them in a land of beauty, but of desolation, in a country whose inhabitants are purchasing by blood and misery the dearest privileges of human nature, where I have come to die. It is night. The cooing azilo, the hooting owl, the flashing firefly, the murmur of time-honored streams, the moonlit foliage of the gray olive woods, dark crags and rugged mountains, throwing awful shadows, and the light of the eternal stars. Such are the objects around me. Can a man speak false in the silence of night, when God and his own heart alone keep watch? When conscience hears the moaning of the dead in the pauses of the breeze, and sees one pale, lifeless figure float away on the current of the stream? My heart whispers that before such witnesses the truth will be truly recorded, and my blood curdles, and my nerves, so firm amid the din of battle, shrink and shudder at the tale I am about to narrate. What is crime? A deed done injurious to others, forbidden by religion, condemned by morality, and which human laws are enacted to punish. A criminal feels all mankind to be his foes. The whole frame of society is erected for his especial ruin. Before he had a right to choose his habitation in the land of his forefathers, and placing the sacred name of liberty between himself and power, none dared check his freeborn steps. His will was his law. The limits of his physical strength were the only barriers to his wildest wanderings. He could walk erect and fear the eye of no man. He who commits a crime forfeits these privileges. Men from out the lowest grade of society can say to him, "You must come with us." They can drag him from those he loves, immure him in a loathsome cell, dole out scant portions of the unchartered air, make a show of him, lead him to death, and throw his body to the dogs. And society, which for the innocent would have raised one cry of horror against the perpetrators of such outrages, look on and clap their hands with applause. This is a vulgar aspect of the misery of which I speak. A crime may never be discovered. Mine lies buried in my own breast. Years have passed, and none point at me and whisper, "There goes the murderer." But do I not feel that God is my enemy, and my own heart whispers condemnation? I know that I am an impostor, that any day may discover the truth, but more heavy than any fear of detection is the secret hidden in my own heart. The icy touch of the death I caused creeps over me during the night. I am pursued by the knowledge that naught I do can prosper, for the cry of innocence is raised against me, and the earth groans with the secret burden I have committed to her bosom. That the death blow was not actually dealt by my hand in no manner mitigates the stings of conscience. My act was the murderer, though my intention was guiltless of death. Is there a man who at some time has not desired to possess, by illegal means, a portion of another's property, or to obey the dictates of an animal instinct, and plant his foot on the neck of his enemy? Few are so cold of blood or temperate of mood as not, at some one time, to have felt hurried beyond the demarcations set up by conscience and law. Few but have been tempted without the brink of the forbidden, but they stopped, while I leaped beyond. There is the difference between us. Falsely do they say who allege that there is no difference in guilt between the thought and act. To be tempted is human. To resist temptation, surely, if framed like me, such is to raise us from our humanity into the sphere of angels. Many are the checks afforded us. Some are possessed by fear. Others are endowed by a sensibility so prophetic of the evil that must ensue, that perforce they cannot act the thing they desire. They tremble at the idea of being the cause of events over whose future course they can have no control. They fear injuring others and their own remorse. But I disdained all these considerations. They occurred but faintly and ineffectually to my mind. Piety, conscience, and moral respect yielded before a feeling which decked its desires in the garb of necessity. Oh, how vain it is to analyze motive. Each man has the same motives, but it is the materials of each mind, the plastic or rocky nature, the mild or the burning temperament, that rejects the alien influence or receives it into its own essence and causes the act. Such an impulse is as a summer healthy breeze just dimpling a still lake to one, while to another it is the whirlwind that rouses him to spread ruin around. The Almighty who framed my miserable being made me a man of passion. They say that of such are formed the great and good. I know not that I am neither, but I will not arraign the Creator. I will hope that in feeling my guilt, in acknowledging the super-excellence of virtue, I fulfill, in part, His design. After me let no man doubt, but that to do what is right is to ensure his own happiness, or that self-restraint and submission to the voice of conscience implanted in our souls impart more dignity of feeling, more true majesty of being, than a puerile assertion of will and a senseless disregard of immutable principles. Is passion known in these days, such as I felt? Has any other experienced it? The expression has fled from our lips, but it is as deep-seated as ever in our hearts. Who of created beings has not loved? Who of my sex has not felt the struggle and the yielding in the struggle of the better to the worse parts of our nature? Who so dead to nature's influence as not, at least for some brief moments, to have felt that body and soul were a slight sacrifice to obtain possession of the affections of her he loved? Who for some moments in his life would not have seen his mistress dead at his feet rather than wedded to another? To feel this tyranny of passion is to be human. To conquer it is to be virtuous. He who conquers himself is, in my eyes, the only true hero. Alas, I am not such. I am among the vanquished, and view the wretch I am, and learn that there is nothing so contemptible, so pitiable, so eternally miserable, as he who is defeated in his conflict with passion. That I am such, this very scene, this very occupation testifies. Once the slave of headlong impulse, I am now the victim of remorse. I am come to seek death, because I cannot retrieve the past. I long for the moment when the bullet shall pierce my flesh, and the pains of dissolution gather round me. Then I may hope to be that for which I thirst free. There is one who loves me. She is pure and kind as a guardian angel. She is as my own child. She implores me to live. With her my days might pass in a peace and innocence that saints might envy, but so heavy are the fetters of memory, so bitter the slavery of my soul, that even she cannot take away the sting from life. Death is all I covet. When these pages are read, the hand that traces them will be powerless, the brain that dictates will have lost its functions. This is my last labor, my legacy to my fellow beings. Do not let them disdain the outpourings of a heart which for years has buried its recollections and remorse in silence. The waters were pent up by a dam, now they rush impetuously forth. They roar as if pursued by 1,000 torrents. Their turmoil deafens heaven. And what though their sound be only conveyed by the little implement that traces these lines? Not less headlong than the swelling waves is the spirit that pours itself out in these words. I am calmer now. I have been wandering beside the stream, and despite the lurking foe and deceptive moonbeams, I have ascended the steep mountain's side, and looked out on the misty sea, and sought to gain from reposing nature some relief to my sense of pain. The hour of midnight is at hand, all is still, I am calm, and with deliberation begin to narrate that train of circumstances, or rather of feelings, that hurried me first to error, then to crime, and lastly, brought me here to die. I lost my mother before I can well remember. I have a confused recollection of her crying, and of her caressing me, and I can call to mind seeing her ill in bed and her blessing me, but these ideas are rather like revelations of an antenatal life than belonging to reality. She died when I was 4 years old. My childhood's years were stormy and drear. My father, a social, and I believe, even a polite man in society, was rough and ill-tempered at home. He had gambled away his own slender younger brother's fortune and his wife's portion, and was too idle to attend to a profession, and yet not indolent enough for a life devoid of purpose and pursuit. Our family was a good one. It consisted of 2 brothers, my father and my uncle. This latter, favored of birth and fortune, remained long unmarried, and was in weak health. My father expected him to die. His death, and his own consequent inheritance of the family estate, was his constant theme, but the delayed hope irritated him to madness. I knew his humor even as a child, and escaped it as I could. His voice, calling my name, made my blood run cold. His epithets of abuse, so frequently applied, filled me with boiling but ineffectual rage. I am not going to dwell on those painful days when, a weak, tiny boy, I felt as if I could contend with the paternal giant, and did contend, till his hand felled me to the ground, or cast me from his threshold with scorn and seeming hate. I dare say he did not hate me, but certainly no touch of natural love warmed his heart. One day he received a letter from his brother. I was but 10 years old, but rendered old and careworn by suffering. I remember that I looked on him as he took it and exclaimed, "From Uncle John, what have we here?" With a nervous tremor as to the passions the perusal of it might excite. He chuckled as he broke the seal. He fancied that he called him to his dying bed, and that well over. "You shall go to school, my fine fellow," he cried. "We shall have no more of your tricks at home." He broke the seal. He read the letter. It announced his brother's marriage and asked him to the wedding. I let fall the curtain over the scene that ensued. You would have thought that a villainous fraud had been committed, in which I was implicated. He drove me with blows from his door. I foamed with rage, and then I sat down and wept, and crept away to the fields, and wondered why I was born, and longed to kill my uncle, who was the cause to me of so much misery. Everything changed for the worse now. Hitherto my father had lived on hope, now he despaired. He took to drinking, which exalted his passions and debased his reason. This at times gave me a superiority over him. When tipsy, I could escape his blows, which yet, when sober, fell on me with double severity. But even the respite I gained through his inebriety afforded me no consolation. I felt at once humbled and indignant at the shame so brought on us. I, child as I was, expostulated with him. I was knocked down and kicked from the room. Oh, what a world this appeared to me, a war of the weak with the strong, and how I despised everything except victory. Time wore on. My uncle's wife bore him in succession 2 girls. This was a respite. My father's spirits rose, but fallen as he was, he could only celebrate his reawakened hopes by deeper potations and coarse jokes. The next offspring was a boy. He cost my father his life. Habits of drink had inflamed his blood, and his violence of temper made him nearly a maniac. On hearing of the birth of the heir, he drank to drown thought. Wine was too slow a medicine. He quaffed deeply of brandy and fell into a sleep, or rather torpor, from which he never after awoke. It was better so. He had spent everything. He was deeply in debt. He had lost all power of raising himself from the state of debasement into which he had fallen. The next day would have seen him in prison. I was taken in by my uncle. At first the peace and order of the household seemed to me paradise. The comfort and regularity of the meals was a sort of happy and perpetual miracle. My eye was no longer blasted by the sight of frightful excesses, nor my ear wounded by obstreperous shouts. I was no longer reviled. I no longer feared being felled to the ground. I was not any more obliged to obtain food by stratagem or by expostulations, which always ended by my being the victim of personal violence. The mere calm was balmy, and I fancied myself free because I was no longer in a state of perpetual terror. But soon I felt the cold and rigid atmosphere that, as far as regarded me, ruled this calm. No eye of love ever turned on me, no voice ever spoke a cheering word. I was there on sufferance, and was quickly deemed a troublesome inmate, while the order and regularity required of me, and the law passed that I was never to quit the house alone, became at last more tormenting than the precarious, but wild and precious liberty of my former life. My habits were bad enough. My father's vices had fostered my evil qualities. I had never learned to lie or cheat, for such was foreign to my nature. But I was rough, self-willed, lazy, and insolent. I have a feeling, such was my sense of bliss, on first entering the circle of order and peace, that a very little kindness would have subdued my temper and awakened a desire to please. It was not tried. From the very first I was treated with a coldness to which a child is peculiarly sensitive. The servants, by enforcing the rules of the house, became first my tormentors and then my enemies. I grew imperious and violent. Complaint, reprehension, and punishment despoiled my paradise of its matin glow, and then I returned at once to my own bad self. I was disobedient and reckless. Soon it was decreed that I was utterly intolerable, and I was sent to school. This, a boy's common fate, I had endured without a murmur, had it not been inflicted as a punishment, and I made over to my new tyrants, even in my own hearing, as a little blackguard, quite irreclaimable, and only to be kept in order by brute force. It is impossible to describe the effect of this declaration of my uncle, followed up by the master's recommendation to the usher to break my spirit, if he could not bend it, had on my heart, which was bursting with a sense of injury, panting for freedom, and resolved not to be daunted by the menaces of the tyrants before me. I declared war with my whole soul against the world. I became all I had been painted. I was sullen, vindictive, desperate. I resolved to run away. I cared not what would befall me. I was nearly 14. I was strong and could work. I could join a gang of gypsies. I could act their life singly, and subsisting by nightly depredation, spend my days in liberty. It was at an hour when I was meditating flight that the master sent for me. I believed that some punishment was in preparation. I hesitated whether I should not instantly fly. A moment's thought told me that was impossible and that I must obey. I went with a dogged air and a determination to resist. I found my tyrant with a letter in his hand. "I do not know what to do with you," he said. "I have a letter here from a relation asking you to spend the day. You deserve no indulgence, but for this once you may go. Remember, any future permission depends upon your turning over an entirely new leaf. Go, sir, and be grateful to my lenity if you can. Remember, you are to be home at 9. I asked no questions. I did not know where I was to go, yet I left him without a word. I was sauntering back to the prison yard, which they called a playground, when I was told that there was a pony chaise at the door ready to take me. My heart leaped at the word. I fancied that, by means of this conveyance, I could proceed on the first stage of my flight. The pony carriage was of the humblest description. An old man drove. I got in, and away we trotted. the little cob that drew it going much faster than his looks gave warrant. The driver was deaf, I was sullen, not a word did we exchange. My plan was that he should take me to the farthest point he intended, and then that I should leap out and take to my heels. As we proceeded, however, my rebel fit somewhat subsided. We left the town in which the school was situated, and the dreary, dusty roads I was accustomed to perambulate under the superintendence of the ushers. We entered shady lanes and umbrageous groves. We perceived extensive prospects and saw the winding of romantic streams. A curtain seemed drawn from before the scenes of nature, and my spirits rose as I gazed on new objects and saw earth spread wide and free around. At first this only animated me to a keener resolve to fly, but as we went on, a vague sentiment possessed my soul. The skylarks winged up to heaven, and the swallows skimmed the green earth. I felt happy because nature was gay, and all things free and at peace. We turned from a lane redolent with honeysuckle into a little wood, whose short thick turf was interspersed with moss and starred with flowers. Just as we emerged, I saw a little railing, a rustic green gate, and a cottage clustered over with woodbine and jessamine, standing secluded among, yet peeping out from the overshadowing trees. A little peasant boy threw open the gate, and we drove up to the cottage door. At a low window which opened on the lawn, in a large armchair, sat a lady, evidently marked by ill health, yet with something so gentle and unearthly in her appearance as at once to attract and please. Her complexion had faded into whiteness. Her hair was nearly silver, yet not a grisly grayish white, but silken still in its change. Her dress was also white, and there was something of a withered look about her, redeemed by a soft but bright gray eye, and more by the sweetest smile in the world, which she wore as, rising from her chair, she embraced me, exclaiming, "I know you from your likeness to your mother, dear, dear Rupert." That name of itself touched a chord which for many years had been mine. My mother had called me by that name, so indeed had my father, when any momentary softness of feeling allowed him to give me any other appellation except "you, sir." "You dog, you." My uncle, after whom I was also called John, chose to drop what he called a silly, romantic name, and in his house and in his letters I was always John. Rupert breathed of a dear home and my mother's kiss, and I looked inquiringly on her who gave it me, when my attention was attracted, riveted by the vision of a lovely girl who had glided in from another room and stood near us, radiant in youth and beauty. She was indeed supremely lovely, exuberant in all the charms of girlhood, and her beauty was enhanced by the very contrast to the pale lady by whom she stood. And hoary she seemed, standing by a disembodied spirit, black, soft, large eyes, overpowering in their luster, and yet more so from the soul that dwelt within, a cherub. Look, a fairy form, with a complexion and shape that spoke of health and joy. What could it mean? Who could she be? And who was she who knew my name? It was an enigma, but one full of promise to me, who had so long been exiled from the charities of life, and who, as the heart panteth for the water brooks, panted for love. Chapter 27. After a little explanation, I discovered who my new friends were. The lady and my mother were remotely related, but they had been educated together and separated only when they married. My mother's death had prevented my knowing that such a relation existed, far less that she took the warmest interest in the son of her earliest friend. Mrs. Rivers had been the poorer of the two, and for a long time considered that her childhood's companion was moving in an elevated sphere of life, while she had married a lieutenant in the Navy, and while he was away, attending the duties of his profession, she lived in retirement and economy in the rustic, low-roofed, yet picturesque and secluded cottage, whose leaf-shrouded casements and flowery lawn even now are before me and speak of peace. I never call to mind that abode of tranquility without associating it with the poet's wish. Mine be a cot beside the hill. A beehive's hum shall soothe my ear. A willowy brook that turns a mill, with many a fall shall linger near. To anyone who fully understands and appreciates the peculiar beauties of England, who knows how much elegance, content, and knowledge can be sheltered under such a roof, these lines must ever, I think, as to me, have a music of their own, and, unpretending as they are, breathe the very soul of happiness. In this embowered cot, near which a clear stream murmured, which was clustered over by 1,000 odoriferous parasites, which stood in the seclusion of a beech wood, there dwelt something more endearing even than all this, and one glance at the only daughter of Mrs. Rivers served to disclose that an angel dwelt in the paradise. Ally the Rivers, there is music and smiles and tears, a whole life of happiness and moments of intensest transport in the sound. Her beauty was radiant. Her dark eastern eye, shaded by the veined and darkly fringed lid, beamed with a soft but penetrating fire. Her face of a perfect oval, and lips which were wreathed into 1,000 smiles, or softly and silently parted, seemed the home of every tender and poetic expression which one longed to hear them breathe forth. Her brow clear as day, her swan throat and symmetrical and fairy-like form disclosed a perfection of loveliness that the youngest and least susceptible must have felt, even if they did not acknowledge. She had two qualities which I have never seen equaled separately, but which, united in her, formed a spell no one could resist: the most acute sensitiveness to joy or grief in her own person, and the most lively sympathy with these feelings in others. I have seen her so enter heart and soul into the sentiments of one in whom she was interested, that her whole being took the color of their mood, and her very features and complexion appeared to alter in unison with theirs. Her temper was never ruffled. She could not be angry. She grieved too deeply for those who did wrong, but she could be glad, and never have I seen joy, the very sunshine of the soul, so cloudlessly expressed as in her countenance. She could subdue the stoutest heart by a look, a word, and were she ever wrong herself, a sincere acknowledgment, an ingenuous shame, grief to have offended, and eagerness to make reparation, turned her very error into a virtue. Her spirits were high, even to wildness, but at their height, tempered by such thought for others, such inbred feminine softness, that her most exuberant gaiety resembled heart-cheering music, and made each bosom respond. Everything loved her. Her mother idolized her, each bird of the grove knew her, and I felt sure that the very flowers she tended were conscious of, and rejoiced in, her presence. Since my birth, or at least since I had lost my mother in early infancy, my path had been cast upon thorns and brambles, blows and stripes, cold neglect, reprehension, and debasing slavery. To such was I doomed. I had longed for something to love, and in the desire to possess something whose affections were my own, I had secreted at school a little nest of field mice on which I tended, but human being there was none who marked me, except to revile, and my proud heart rose in indignation against them. Mrs. Rivers had heard a sad story of my obduracy, my indolence, my violence. She had expected to see a savage, but my likeness to my mother won her heart at once, and the affection I met transformed me at once into something worthy of her. I had been told I was a reprobate till I half believed. I felt that there was war between me and my tyrants, and I was desirous to make them suffer even as they made me. I read in books of the charities of life, and the very word seemed only a portion of that vast system of imposture with which the strong oppressed the weak. I did not believe in love or beauty, or if ever my heart opened to it, it was to view it in external nature, and to wonder how all of perceptive and sentient in this wondrous fabric of the universe was instinct with injury and wrong. Mrs. Rivers was a woman of feeling and sense. She drew me out, she dived into the secrets of my heart. For my mother's sake she loved me, and she saw that to implant sentiments of affection was to redeem a character not ungenerous, and far, far from cold, whose evil passions had been fostered as in a hotbed, and whose better propensities were nipped in the bud. She strove to awaken my susceptibility to kindness by lavishing 1,000 marks of favor. She called me her son, her friend. She taught me to look upon her regard as a possession of which nothing could deprive me, and to consider herself and her daughter as near and dear ties that could not be rent away. She imparted happiness, she awoke gratitude, and made me in my innermost heart swear to deserve her favor. I now entered on a new state of being, and one of which I had formed no previous idea. I believed that the wish to please one who was dear to me would render every task easy, that I did wrong merely from caprice and revenge, and that if I chose, I could with my finger stem and direct the tide of my passions. I was astonished to find that I could not even bend my mind to attention, and I was angry with myself when I felt my breast boiling with tumultuous rage, when I promised myself to be meek, enduring, and gentle. My endeavors to conquer these evil habits were indeed arduous. I forced myself by fits, and starts to study sedulously. I yielded obedience to our school laws. I tax myself to bear with patience the injustice and impertinence of the ushers and the undisguised tyranny of the master. But I could not forever string myself to this pitch. Meanness and falsehood and injustice again and again awoke the tiger in me. I'm not going to narrate my boyhood's wrongs. I was doomed. Sent to school with a bad character, which at first I had taken pains to deserve, and afterward doing right in my own way, and still holding myself aloof from all, scorning their praise, and untouched by their censure, I gained no approbation, and was deemed a dangerous savage, whose nails must be kept close pared, and whose limbs were still to be fettered, lest he should rend his keepers. From such a scene I turned, each Sunday morning, my willing steps to the cottage of Mrs. Rivers. There was something fascinating to me in the very peculiarities of her appearance. Ill health had brought premature age upon her person, but her mind was as active and young, her feelings as warm as ever. She could only stand for a few minutes, and could not unassisted walk across the room. She took hardly any nourishment, and looked, as I have said, more like a spirit than a woman. Thus deprived of every outward resource, her mind acquired, from habits of reflection and resignation, aided by judicious reading, a penetration and delicacy quite unequaled. There was a philosophical truth in all her remarks, adorned by a feminine tact and extreme warmth of heart, that rendered her as admirable as she was endearing. Sometimes she suffered great pain, but, for the most part, her malady, which was connected with the spine, had only the effect of extreme weakness, and at the same time of rendering her sensations acute and delicate. The odor of flowers, the balmy air of morning, the evening breeze almost intoxicated her with delight. Any dissonant sound appeared to shatter her. Peace was within, and she coveted peace around, and it was her dearest pleasure when I and her lovely daughter, were at her feet, she playing with the sunny ringlets of Alitha's hair, and I listening, with a thirst for knowledge and ardor to be taught, while she with eloquence mild and cheering, full of love and wisdom, charmed our attentive ears, and caused us to hang on all she said, as on the oracles of a divinity.